Hello, everyone. I am your host, and together we are discerning truth. Today I'm going to talk about my first Christian lesson. This is the first in the series on pure Christian teachings, and today we're going to be talking about sharing the gospel. Now, I'm going to be talking about certain things that you should probably know before you start to share the gospel. The first thing I want to talk about is relational evangelism. So with this next generation that's coming out, rationality and a lot of logic seems to become coming on the back burner. It seems now that this generation cares more about feelings than they do about thoughts and reason. So back in the Billy Graham days of evangelism, the street evangelism was very popular, and there was lots of converts at that time. There was this big boom actually in conversions in his day. But then we started to see this slow down, and it was a response to a growing postmodernism, I would say, postmodernist ideologies. And so with postmodern ideologies, relational evangelism has become so important. So I'll give a contrast between relational evangelism and street preaching. Now, both are viable. Don't get me wrong. I have nothing wrong. I see nothing wrong with street preaching. I think that that's a wonderful way, and it does reach many people. But I'm mainly speaking about the most effective way, I think, to reach millennials and Gen Zs, my generation. So being on university campuses, I've done street evangelism with my club that I've talked about in my previous video. And I found it to be effective in some ways. But what I found to be most effective is actually getting to know people in your life, not just preaching at them, but instead to know them on a deep personal level. Start to ask them questions, get them to question their own ideology, their own perceptions, and then you can relay the gospel to them after the fact. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. That's why I'm going to be talking about this first, is because I think it's so important to establish that. I'm going to be talking mainly from a relational evangelistic viewpoint, not so much a street preaching viewpoint, though I think both are very viable. So I'm going to talk about a book called I Once Was Lost by Don Everts and Doug Shoup. I think that's how you say his name. And what this book talks about is basically the path from being an unbeliever to a believer. It makes this kind of formulaic outline of how a Christian becomes a Christian. Now, this is, like I say, formulaic, but becoming saved is never a formula. But this is often how someone comes from being an unbeliever to a believer. They follow this kind of step-by-step process. And if you're a Christian and you think about how you became saved, it probably followed this step-by-step process. So the first step is knowing and trusting a Christian. It's so important that people know and trust a Christian. So, whether you heard from a friend that about the gospel or you saw it in a video, you had to know and trust that person before you would even listen to what they're going to say. If you don't trust somebody, then all their credibility goes down the tube. There's no ethos there. And so it's so important that the first thing you do with somebody is that you ensure that you establish a trusting relationship. Now, how do you build a trusting relationship? Well, it has to go deeper than just surface level conversation. You should have surface level conversation, but try to, even once a day when you're hanging out with that person, to instill some more wisdom or deep thoughts into that person. Ask, what do you think the purpose of life is? And then listen to their answer. Gather that information, because that'll be important later. And then they'll often ask, what do you think of the purpose of life? And then you can state that you're a Christian and that you believe that the purpose of life is to serve God, is to build his mission, to build his kingdom and establish his mission here on earth. So you can talk about that. They've asked, now you have an opening to talk about that. After they've known and trust you, it's important that they become curious about Christianity. So this happens where not just Christianity, sorry, but become curious about deeper things. So this can look like a bunch of different things. So people become curious about, where did all this come from? You look at creation, and you see that, there has to be a creator that created all these things. They could go from atheism, like staunch atheism, to agnosticism, usually, or being a skeptic into being an agnostic, kind of starting to wonder and question things. So how do you do that? Well, again, it comes from asking these deeper questions. A great question is, to get the person to think about, look at all of creation. The human eye, for example, is so amazing. There's only so much science can really answer about it. You can ask a scientist, a biologist, well, how do I see? And they'll say, well, you see with your eye. Well, how does that work? Well, it works by you perceiving an object, and then, through light patterns, and then that goes into the back of your eye, into your optic nerve, and then that takes it to your occipital lobe, and you understand that. And then you ask them, well, how does that work? And they can get talking about neurons and all things like that. But eventually you keep asking, and you keep asking, and you keep asking, and then the only answer they can really give is, well, it just works that way. It just happens to be that neurons fire like that. It gets down to like the bare bones of the question. And the fact that science can't answer all of that says that there's something beyond what science is, even capable of answering. And so when you get people to think in that deeper sense, it gets them to question, well, man, if there's something out there, I ought to know it, because, then you can even lead into, well, where are you going to spend eternity when you die? Everybody is going to be dead longer than they live. You could live 100 years, but, you're going to die, and then 1,000 years will pass since you died. So there should be thought. You should talk about how we should all be thinking about where we're going after this, because one day you're going to be on your deathbed, maybe, and you're going to be scared, and you're going to feel alone, and you're going to feel, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to me? And so you better have assurance in where you're going. So it's important that we get people to become curious, and then they start to, believe it, start to think that something else is out there. And then what comes is something called opening up to change. So now that they've come from being curious about something, now they're starting to think, okay, maybe there is something wrong with my belief system. Maybe, I'm not getting all the answers from atheism, or I'm not getting or I'm having some problems with Islam and the teachings that it says, or I'm having problems, just living for myself. The people will often see that there's something wrong with the ideology that they're subscribing to, and so they become open to change. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're open to Jesus, but now they're open to, they've humbled themselves to a point of, okay, well, maybe I don't have it all right. And the way that you do this is by questioning their ideology. Start to question if really know the person, know where they live. That's a number one rule of evangelism, I would say, is know that person so well, and know what they are subscribing to. And so, I would say that the ways that you can do that, I'm thinking about even my testimony. The man that helped bring me to Christ, he'd ask me, why do you pray to saints? Why do you pray to Mary? Why do you call a priest father? These things, it's so important, to understand other religions, understand Islam. That's a good thing to understand. You could bring up hadiths. There's plenty of hadiths that a lot of Muslims will even question or haven't even read, about Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old and then consummating the marriage when she was 9 through rape. There's lots of things that, you tell that to a Muslim and they go, oh my goodness, what is this talking about? And so start to question these things. Start to question, well, you're not getting fulfillment through having sex and making money and doing drugs. You're not getting fulfillment for just living for yourself. There's something missing. There's a hole in your heart that's missing. Start to get them to question that. So then the fourth thing is seeking after God. This is actually where they start to look into Jesus. I think of the whole Lee Strobel A Case for Christ example, if you've ever seen that movie or read that book. It's an amazing book. I would highly recommend it. He talks about how he hated Christianity. He hated it and he wanted to disprove it. But the more he looked into the evidence, the more that he saw, that Jesus was the answer. I would highly recommend, in this stage, to be sending people sending people videos that you've seen, because they're actually now really curious. They're seeking after Jesus. They want to look into him. Feed the fire, man. Feed the fire. Give them things. Give them books to read. Give them all sorts of stuff. Be praying, and always be praying for this person. I can't emphasize that enough. You need to be relying on God. Pray for these people. That's I'd say another I have so many number one rules. They're all tied because they're all so important. But it's so important to be praying for these people and giving them and feeding them this desire to wanting to know Jesus. Now, the last step is entering the kingdom. And now this is where they actually are willing to give their life to Christ. And what I would say here in this stage, what's important for you is to make sure that they're giving their life to Christ for the right reason. Some people in especially the Western church today are giving their life to Christ, but it's a false Christ. It's a Christ that they believe won't allow them to ever see persecution. It's a Christ that they believe maybe will help them prosper in wealth and everything in the future. Or they believe that it's a Christ that will accept the sin in their life and not expect them to repent. Or maybe it's they're converting for the community, the newfound community that you've introduced them to or something. Make sure they're giving their heart to Christ because they both intellectually know him and know him in their heart and truly want to follow him. Make sure that you're teaching them that this is the cost of being a Christian, that there's a cost here, that an experience with God that costs nothing, as I'm quoting, what's his name? Leonard Ravenhill. An experience with God that costs nothing is worth nothing. There is a cost to being a Christian. You will be hated by the world. You cannot, hang on to your sin. But God will work in you to change your desires. So it's important to basically in this stage have their theology right. I've had the privilege of seeing one of my friends, close friends since junior high, become a Christian a couple of years ago, and it was because I was following these steps. Now it was actually because of Jesus, and he happened to go. But I can tell you, he went through these steps, these exact steps, and it was because I introduced him into a community that loved him and questioned him on these things. I introduced him to Power to Change, that he went through these stages and actually gave his heart to Christ. But I made well sure that he was giving his heart to Christ for the right reason. I asked him, man, why are you giving your heart to Jesus? And he gave me the answer of, I have an intellectual, he didn't phrase it exactly like this, but basically he said, I have an intellectual belief in him, and I have also a belief in my heart, and I want to give my life to him because I know that he is my God, and I know he bled on that cross for my sins. So, and then I saw him from there really become passionate about his faith and grow and be sanctified every day. And he makes me just so happy as a living testament to the power of Jesus. This was not my doing at all. I don't take any credit, but the power of Jesus I've seen in him to change his life is just amazing. So that's that. I'm going to be talking about now basically 4 points that you need to hit when you share the gospel with somebody. And so basically these 4 points are extremely important. If you don't hit these 4 points, all of these points when you share the gospel, Now, I'm not saying it has to be done all at once. It can be, but you need to hit these points when you share the gospel with somebody. They're so important because it's the entire message. Now, I've simplified it into 4 points. I actually didn't do this. This is a thing that Power to Change has done, that I'm taking, but and I'm also just taking Bible verses to back it up. But yeah, you have to hit these 4 points. So the first one is that God created us in His image. So this is the first very key thing. He created us in His image, and also we are heirs to His throne. So as it says here, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves around on the ground. So what happened here was God created representatives on earth for His kingdom, and that was human beings. He blessed us, and He wanted us to be fruitful and increase in number, as it says, be fruitful and multiply, and subdue the earth, rule over it. So what this is telling us here is that God wanted us to increase in number. Now, we can interpret this in 2 different ways, and they're both correct. The first is that He wanted us to get married and have children and subdue the earth and create human beings through biological sex and marriage. The second thing He wanted us to do is not just create other human beings. He wanted us to create human beings who were dedicated to God, who ruled the earth on His behalf. He did not want us to create human beings and just have this and to live a licentious lifestyle apart from Him. He created us in this covenant of, I will be your God and you will be my people. And so He created them in the Garden of Eden, and He gave us a choice. He said, you can either trust me and be my representatives, or you can be rebellious and you can define right and wrong for yourselves and go and live a life apart from me. So He gave us this ultimatum. So yeah, that's the first part. You don't have to articulate it exactly how I did, but you should articulate it similarly. Just get the point across that He created us in His image and that we are designed to be His heirs. Now, the second thing is that we sinned and broke our covenant. So what happened was we were in the garden, and we, as imperfect human beings, listened to the serpent, who is Satan, the devil, and he tempted us. He tempted Eve, and then Adam also took of the fruit to basically define, eat of the knowledge of good and evil, define right and wrong for ourselves, and become like God. The temptation was that if we can define right and wrong for ourselves, then we can become our own God, and we can, rule over ourselves and be our own masters. We don't have to serve this God who created us. We can become our own creator in a sense if we create our own version of right and wrong. And so God was not very happy with that. Obviously, he was very angry with us, and because we are sinful, and because we are now evil from this decision, God, being perfectly good, cannot exist alongside of us. So He cast us out from the Garden of Eden. And so there's this dilemma. We have this loving, good God that created us, and now we have these evil people that are just, so, selfish that they would define right and wrong for themselves and try to live a life without God. So, the interesting thing about the Bible is that it should end here. God said that the day that you eat of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall surely die. And then the book should have ended with, and they surely died. The end. That's the end of humanity. But no, God is so loving that we died spiritually and physically, but he created a promise for us to be redeemed. And that's this third point that you have to talk about, which is that God promised a redeemer to bear our sin. He promised that he would send his son to die. He would send his son to die as a sin offering for us. And so where we get this is in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, when he's talking to the man and the woman and Satan. And he says to Satan, the serpent, "And I will put enmity," which means hostility, "between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This is the first prophecy of Jesus. This is saying that there will be a seed coming from humanity. It'll be both flesh and God. And what's going to happen is he's going to crush you, Satan. But in the process, you will strike his heel, meaning he will die a very gruesome and horrible death doing so, which he died on the cross. Now, it's really interesting when we read Isaiah 53, which is also in the Old Testament, how closely that resembles this prophecy of Jesus, resembles him. It says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." So what Isaiah is prophesying here is that the Messiah, Jesus, is going to come and he's going to die for our transgressions so that we can be reunited with God the Father. So now here's the fourth and last point of sharing the gospel. We have the opportunity to be his again. So, God now gives us the choice. He gives us the free will to choose him. And so if God, it all depends on what love is, really. If I were to kidnap you, if I put a gun to your head and I brought you into my basement and I said to you, "You will love me," is that really love? No, it's not, because you don't have a choice in the matter. God gives us the choice now to choose him. And if we do not choose him here on earth, why would we ever want to spend an eternity with him in heaven? And so what hell is basically, it's a lot of things, but what hell is it's in its entirety, a good way to sum it up is separation from God. It's complete darkness and separation from God. So I'm just going to read this. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son." A lot of people will just read John 3:16, but they won't read John 3:16 to 18, because verse 18 also tells the tale of those who do not accept Jesus, do not accept the power of the Savior. It's like if there's the question that often comes up with this: if God is just, why does he send people to hell? Well, I would answer that God doesn't send anyone to hell. You send yourself to hell. You choose to go to hell. It's like if, someone murdered your mother. Okay. If someone murdered your mother and you were in the courtroom and the criminal was there and he was found guilty, and the judge said, "Okay, you're guilty, but you know what? You're just going to walk free." How would you feel? You'd feel robbed of justice, right? So for God to be a good God, he has to be a just God. He has to punish wickedness. He can't just allow everybody to go scot-free. But the thing is, we've all fallen short of the glory of God, as talked about in Romans. So there's no hope for any of us, because we're all guilty. I'm guilty of sin. I sin every day. And I try not to, but thank God for the power of Jesus and the blood of the Lamb, who has redeemed me and who has redeemed you And so this needs to be communicated, that you need to choose this gift. Otherwise, you don't truly love him, and there is no true love of the Father. And so it's like to perpetuate the whole idea that we are all guilty. It'd be like if you lived a life, or if I lived a life of, I was a really good person, quote unquote. I was charitable. I was kind. I was all sorts of things. But, one day I just murdered my neighbor, and I dug a hole and I put him in my backyard. And one day someone finds the body, and I'm sitting in prison, let's say I just I put him in my backyard, and then I continue to do good things even after the fact. Well, am I still a murderer? Yes, I'm still a murderer. Even though I did all these good things, I'm still a murderer, which is a problem with the Islamic doctrine of the whole idea of all your good deeds have to outweigh your bad deeds, and that's what allows you to go in heaven. There is nothing that outweighs the fact that I murdered someone, or that I stole something, or that I lied. I still did it. And that was something I did wrong, and that needs to be, there needs to be a punishment for that. But God sent his one and only Son to die for our transgressions. For our transgressions. And it's a free gift. It cannot be won through your works. God has given it to you by grace alone, through faith. And so that needs to be communicated. So those four things need to be communicated. And it's a case-by-case basis. And I'm not saying you have to say that all those things at once to the person, but you should communicate those parts of the gospel over time to them, and again, follow that pathway. So those are some tips about sharing the gospel that I would suggest. If you have any other comments or questions about it, please leave it in the comment section below. And if you like this video and would want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button. And if you want to like the video, go ahead. But that's it for me. This has been Discerning Truth. I'm signing off.